The Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman has spoken about public sector units, and she says and affirms that PSUs have been prospering under the Modi regime over the last 10 years. In a few lengthy posts on X, formerly known as Twitter, the Finance Minister has said that the Congress's claims on PSUs falls flat. The Modi government's capex has led to healthy gains in PSU stocks, is that claim. Let's discuss this. And to do so, Sanjiv Bhasin joins us. He's director at IIFL Securities and the head of equity at Marketsmithindia. Mayuresh Joshi also with us on this discussion. Great to have you both, gentlemen. Sanjiv Bhasin, a lot has been said in the past about how capex has been government-driven, that private capex has been lagging. But how much has government capex really benefited PSUs in your opinion, and what kind of PSUs in particular?
Yeah, good evening. I think it's been across the board. You've never had this type of autonomy and, freedom to hire, fire, and perform. And there has been an incentive. And I think that, last maybe 20 years, you've not seen this type of performance, which came in the last 2 years. The capex. Two, these are monopolies in their own estate as far as defense goes, as far as railways, as far as ferrous, non-ferrous metals go, because iron ore, aluminium, all are, inherently endowed in the country. And PSU banks, which saw their balance sheets being cleared, and now aggressive lending with, the whole gamut of fintech and electronic adding to them. So I think, arguably, this has been the best phase ever in corporate history, that the performance of PSUs. And rightly so, the market cap in the last 5 years or 4 years has moved from something like 12.5 crore to 75 lakh crore, which is astounding amount of wealth which has been created in the last 2.5, 3 years.
Take this across to Mayuresh as well. Mayuresh, the finance minister, pointing out how well PSU stocks have done and that they've outdone the benchmark indices through the last 10 years. In fact, through those tweets that she's put out, she says that returns by the Nifty CPSE has been 78.8%. Compare that to Nifty 500, which is 27.4% is what she's put out. And the Nifty 50, she says, has gone up 22.5%. The Nifty CPSE at 78.8%. Do you concur with her views?
Evening, Vikram. Yes, and to a large extent, just to supplement to what Sanjeev was saying, I think 2-3 things which have gone in the right direction. Look at where the gross NPA and the net NPA ratio was for most banks when we started off at 2014. When we were 10 years down the line, you're probably seeing the asset quality being one of the best for the banking sector as a whole, and for public sector undertakings even so better. You have a look in terms of the various reforms carried in the power sector as an example. Yes, I think the initial reforms did not work, but once the reform processes started kicking in terms of tweaks done to the earlier processes, you've seen the kind of capital push that has happened, and further capital push that will accelerate the renewable energy capacity to 500 gigawatts in 2032. So to that extent, I think both in terms of fulfilling global climate needs, as well as expecting complete energy self-sufficiency, the kind of capex that is probably getting into power, just as an example, has driven up a significant amount of re-rating as far as power stocks are concerned, and that gets reflected in their sheer numbers. Have a look in terms of the PSU defense pack as an example. Prior to 2014, I think, look at the overall exports that India did across the globe and where we are at this juncture and the expectations of defense export over the next few years. Look at the orders that defense companies are getting at this juncture. The execution of these orders, the margins at which these orders are coming through. And therefore, I think numbers are a testimony in terms of the policy changes, the processes that have been followed for the PSU space as a whole, which is getting rewarded and recognized by the market. So to that extent, again, I think, is this a structural part of the element that PSUs are going through? Absolutely, yes. I think power is a structural story. Defense is a structural story. PSU banks are very well placed as we speak. And therefore, I think the PSU enterprise universe, which has outperformed the better benchmarks at this point of time, are still expected to do well. Is there a case where valuations are a tad bit expensive compared to where they were for the space? A few years back, yes, but I think change in numbers, change in dynamic conditions warrant that. So yeah, I think
But I was just looking at these numbers, Mayuresh, around 79% growth for PSUs when you look at that index compared to what she says is 22.5% over the 3 years on the Nifty. Would these numbers be correct? I haven't had a chance to check.
No, I have not checked that as well, but I would definitely check that, Vikram. But yes, I think the outperformance has been stark. And just to supplement one additional point on how these numbers might stack up and how they have stacked up, you need to look at the base effect, Vikram. So I think where PSUs were, as I said, forget 2014, I think COVID was a terrible time for most enterprises. And the recovery post COVID, specifically the last 3 years, have been exceptional in terms of all these systems, processes, procedures, and elements that are structurally driving earnings growth and have driven earnings growth for these stocks under consideration. So I've not checked the numbers, but purely going in a post-COVID recovery for the sector as a whole, I think the numbers have done the talking for them, and so have the kind of outperformance compared to the broader indices of air peers as well.
Sanjeev, how would you read this kind of statement in context of investor interest in PSU counters in this period that we are talking about, the last 10 years, whether it's domestic investors, foreign investors, and how have your own calls that you share on media platforms like ours on the PSU pack, how have they been resonated in what we're talking about today?
Well, firstly, the numbers are correct. You have outbeaten the index by 3 times, and the mid cap index by I think 2.5, maybe double of that, and that is rightly so. See, every bull run has its new leaders. From IT, FMCG, pharma. This bull run was only PSUs, and if you own PSUs, the CPSE ETF was 13 and a half. It hit a high of 70 or 75. And that tells you that the basket across the board has been the best performing asset class ever. Now, obviously, you had to go through the pain of the last 5-7 years where ownership, dividend yields were strong, but the stocks did nothing because most benchmark fund managers had said, we will never touch PSUs. Vikram, in the stock market, never say never. If you miss this PSU ownership, you miss the biggest rally of maybe a lifetime. And I think there is more to go. Arguably, we've seen, defense stocks and railway stocks do well just before the budget, particularly railway. But this time it has been stellar. Look at Vande Bharat, look at the advent of cargo, look at the advent of IRCTC or the booking and the capex for the railway stocks. And that is what is actually the icing on the cake.
Right.
Government capex coupled with private capex now coming back on stream is driving PSUs to all-time highs.
Mayuresh, so whether, is being pointed out by Sanjeev, whether it's roads or airports or energy, defense, heavy equipment, overall, if the mandate for building infrastructure remains at the core of the Modi government going ahead as well, would it be wise to have a more positive, longer-term call on PSUs, even with all that divestment talk, more privatization on the cards?
Oh, absolutely. And I think they're doing the steps in the right direction, Vikram. I think they're as competitive as their private counterpart are. They're executing their projects well. So as Sanjeev mentioned, if you're probably talking about roads as an example, the kind of investments that are expected to come into roads, the entire Gati Yojana, right? And the allocation towards that, where roads, railways, airports will have a substantial allocation. Rural, urban, affordable housing as an example as well. You're talking about Nal Se Jal, where piping companies benefit as well. You're talking about the entire energy ecosystem and the self-reliance and self-sufficiency on that. So I think orders are going to come in as far as the sector are concerned. These orders are going to come with decent margins. The PSUs have understood the fact very well that if they execute and they get reflected in numbers, which they have so far, and they keep on continuing doing that, I think the kind of re-rating they have got might very well sustain and continue in the near future as well, with the capex that is still going in across sectors as far as the space is concerned. So no two doubts on my mind. Selectively within this space, earnings will still compound at a very, very healthy pace.
Sanjeev, the divestment targets set by the Modi government, those have been missed in the past. Does that open up opportunities, you think, in FY25? Because now we're looking at a number like 50,000 crores through divestments.
Correct. And the government did this folly in the last 10, before the 10 years, there was always this piecemeal disinvestment, selling some part of Coal India or ONGC just to keep your fiscal in go. This time the government took the hard step. It put 3 PSUs for strategic disinvestment: BPCL, BPCL, Shipping Corporation, and one more, which got delayed due to COVID and other thing. But the value unlocking is now tremendous because there is a CPSE ETF, which is where you are actually floating the stock and you are getting the market cap. Plus, the government has got more and more amount of dividends from these companies out of performance. It is performance which speaks for it. And I think that strategically now there is enough room and appetite among foreigners to pick up the PSU stocks as and when the government does this investment. 53,000 crore, I think, according to me, is going to be very, very easily met. The appetite for PSUs is tremendous. The performance is tremendous. And the going as far as capex and, which we say Viksit Bharat, Nirbhit Bharat, all that is playing out perfectly.
Urgence is being spoken about as an example for HAL, Hindustan Aeronautics, Mayuresh. Where would you say the improvement in the PSUs has been most evident? Because there is talk of better professionalism, there is talk of more operational freedom. But tell us where it is most evident in your understanding and where you've seen it being the weakest as well, where you would have liked to see more to unlock value. And this again within the last 10 years.
So I think generally, if I give a very generic answer to this, I think defense power has done exceptionally well. You've seen PSU banks come out very, very strongly in terms of their performance over the past few years. And I think the aggressiveness is now getting reflected in all these three sectors. They're very, very aggressive and hungry, Vikram, to get orders at competitive rates, good margin orders. They are ready to execute. They are ready to probably also ensure that they diversify, cross-sell as far as banks are concerned, digitalize their entire ecosystem as well, which are huge positives in how the landscape is probably evolving vis-a-vis the private sector. So I think these sectors within the PSU basket definitely hold up. In my opinion, again, I think what remains to be a little bit circumstanced are the downstream companies. Even within the energy space, you've seen companies like coal, NTPC do well as part of the power ecosystem. But the oil downstream companies is where there is still a lot of uncertainty. There were initial signs that steps have been taken, shall be taken. But I think no concrete elements have probably moved in this sector. Again, a commoditized sector which is dependent on the vagaries on how crude moves, how dollar happens, how demand supply conditions happen. But the sheer policies surrounding downstream companies, if they are defined in a more structural manner and more structural steps are taken, I think a lot more can be done for that sector as well.
Unlocking of value can be expected in the PSU universe, and it's something that we have discussed in the past in the light of what the Finance Minister has said today, that turnaround within the last 10 years in the PSU sector. That is quite evident in the way the markets have moved as well, and the traction that this particular pack has gotten in recent times, finding favor with investors. Whether or not it's going to rise to even higher highs remains to be seen. But for the moment, Mayuresh and Sanjiv, thank you very much for joining us with your perspective on this edition of India Tonight. We will take...
If you like this video, then like, share and subscribe to ET Now.